So I've been getting a lot of questions about ketosis and the ketogenic diet. You might have noticed I posted a couple pictures recently about taking ketone readings, so measuring my blood for the level of ketones that are in it. And so I just wanted to clarify a couple things about that. And so, what is a ketogenic diet and what is ketosis? What are ketones? Why might one be interested in this? And what are some potential benefits of a ketogenic diet or using things like exogenous ketones, like MCT oil or brain octane oil or BHB, beta hydroxybutyrate. So I just wanted to, delve into just kind of a simple overview of some of those main concepts, just to give you guys an idea of what is going on. So what is ketosis? Ketosis is a state of physiology where your body is mostly utilizing fats and fatty acids as its primary fuel source instead of carbohydrates and glucose. So what I tell a bunch of my clients when I'm explaining this is that it's sort of like a Prius, like a hybrid vehicle. Your body has the ability to burn sugar or glucose as fuel or ketones as fuel. And so, thousands of years ago, when we were hunting and gathering, we had very little access to food, much less so than we do now. And so, we would be going periods of time, hours, even days without food. And when we did get food, we would be, hunting wild game, eating root vegetables, nuts and seeds, and the berries that we would be eating would only be in season. And so naturally, we were getting a lot of, fat from the animals that we would be eating, and then protein from that, the nuts and seeds, and then very little sugar. We didn't have breads or pastas or anything like that, muffins, pizza, none of that stuff was around back then, thousands of years ago. And so our body kind of adapted to be able to burn our own body fat, basically, in times of starvation and in times of need. And so we have the ability to do that, but our current diet has really shifted us into burning glucose as our primary fuel source. And so, there's pros and cons to burning sugar, and there's pros and cons to burning ketones as well. So ketosis is the process of burning fats as your primary fuel source instead of glucose and sugar molecules. So what is a ketogenic diet? So a ketogenic diet was, established years ago. First, I believe it was in the early 1900s, and they originally developed that for epilepsy. So when they had trouble, controlling people with epilepsy, they would introduce a ketogenic diet and or fasting. So for prolonged periods, days, sometimes even weeks. I've heard of, studies where they fasted people up to about 40 days, and longer actually. So that's kind of how the ketogenic diet was originally introduced. It was introduced even thousands of years ago for epilepsy as well, but, in a more research-based status or environment that was kind of in the early 1900s. So there was definitely some validity to that. People, especially when they started introducing drugs, when people were resistant to that or they had drug-resistant epilepsy, a lot of people would benefit from introducing a ketogenic diet. So that's kind of how that came about, and then people have been using it, more recently for weight loss, cognitive enhancement, just overall body composition, and even bodybuilders have been using that, just to get lean. And then also people have been doing it for anti-aging purposes and anti-cancer purposes as well. Neurodegenerative prevention. So there's a lot of different uses behind it. So a ketogenic diet, kind of got a little bit off track there, but a ketogenic diet is a diet that is mostly fat-based. So most of the calories are coming from fat. And so a lot of the literature defines a ketogenic diet as about 90% fat, which is very high, obviously. So there's a large portion of fat, there was some protein, and then very minimal carbohydrate. So the diet would be consisting of, avocados, olives, olive oil, butter, and then some meats, some fatty meats, and then very little carbohydrates, mostly in the form of probably vegetables. So the main things that they would be avoiding would be, the breads, the refined carbohydrates, things of that nature would be avoided. And so, that's a classical ketogenic diet. The more kind of trendy type of ketogenic diet, or the more applicable ketogenic diet for a lot of people, is like a modified ketogenic diet, or a modified Atkins diet, some people call that. And that's where you have a large percentage of fat in the diet, usually upwards of 65, 75, up to maybe 80% fat. And then the remainder of that coming from protein. So, 10, 20, maybe up to even 30% protein, and then also very minimal carbohydrate. So essentially the ketogenic diet, a lot of literature indicates that it's less than about 50 grams of total carbohydrate per day. So in essence, that might look like a couple scrambled eggs in the morning, cooked in coconut oil, with some spinach or some other vegetables in there, like a large salad for lunch, with some fish or some protein in there, from something like a grass-fed beef or chicken, turkey, things like that. And then, covered in olive oil. Dinner might be the same kind of concoction, meat, a fatty cut of meat, maybe some avocado on there, and then some steamed vegetables or something like that. And then so the majority of the calories are coming from fat. You have moderate protein in there as well, and then you have a very minimal carbohydrate. So let's see. So what are ketones? So ketones are the molecules that are produced when your body is in that sort of starvation mode, or when you're forcing your body to burn fatty acids or ketones as fuel. And so that only happens when you are either fasting, just straight up fasting, just drinking water, or over time. And it usually, if you're not what they call keto adapted or fat adapted, which is basically the term for, your body is used to burning fats as fuels. If you're not fat adapted, if you're used to eating a lot of carbohydrates and things like that, you can fast, and it may take you, 24, 48 hours to get into a mild state of ketosis. So fasting is one way to get into that state, and then the other will be the ketogenic diet. But basically, ketones are what is produced when you're in that state of either fasting or a very reduced carbohydrate intake. Otherwise, when you eat carbohydrates, your body produces insulin in order to process those, in order to kind of suck that blood sugar up into your cells, into your bloodstream, and into your tissues. And that process basically inhibits fat breakdown. So when you have any carbohydrate-rich meal, you're going to inhibit your body's ability to burn fat and to go into ketosis, essentially. So that's why it's so important to eat so little carbohydrates if you want to actually get into ketosis. And and then also the other thing is the protein intake. So that actually matters. If you eat too much protein, you can actually secrete insulin and then create blood sugar from that. And so there's a couple processes that's done by. They're a little bit technical, so I won't get into that. But basically, if you have too much protein, your body will not go into ketosis either. So that's why it's so important to have the very high fat intake, a moderate to lower protein intake, depending on your goals. If your goals are weight loss or even building muscle, things like that, you might have to tweak the protein intake. If you just had a workout, or if you're recovering, like today I'm recovering, so I'm going to eat a little bit more protein than I normally would, just for the sake of recovery and building muscle tissue. But that's another key player that a lot of people miss. They think of a ketogenic diet similar to like an Atkins diet, where they go, they may not be eating enough fat, but they may be eating a ton of protein and low carbohydrate, but that's actually not effective if you're trying to get into ketosis. And so, everybody's different. It depends on what diet you've been eating. It takes your whole physiology at a cellular level will change, over a period of weeks, months, and even years of consuming a higher fat type of a diet, because your cells are made up of a fatty lipid bilayer. And so the types of fats that you've been consuming, if you've been consuming, highly inflammatory, vegetable oils, things of that nature, the whole composition of your cell membranes is going to be different. Likewise, if you've been consuming a lot of carbohydrates, like I was being an athlete, we were trained to eat tons of just carbohydrates, pasta dinners, pre-game meals, just carb loading with sugar, Gatorade and all that kind of stuff, and that creates a different physiology than would a keto adapted or a ketogenic style of an athlete or of a person. So that's also kind of important to consider. So the only way that you can really know if you're in ketosis, other than the way you'll feel, you definitely feel a little bit different when you're in ketosis. At least I found that. Everybody's different, but the only way to really know if you're in ketosis is by measuring it. And so, I've got some information. I'm working on actually putting up a new website, but dansullivanhealthcoach.com. That has a link to the meter that I use. It's the Precision Extra device. So I'll put a link to that below this video too, but you can just get that on Amazon. The actual meters, so the meters that take the sticks that you draw blood on, those are quite expensive actually for the ketones. Blood glucose monitors and the strips are much cheaper, but the ketones are pretty expensive. I mean, they're like $2-3 a stick. So what I did is I found some on eBay. So that's, and to kind of get them in bulk, like I got 100 of them for about $153, something like that. So, $1.50 a pop, which isn't terrible, but and the other thing about measuring those is you kind of are going to be able to see patterns, what you've eaten, and then, measuring your ketones an hour later or so, or just throughout the day, and to really pinpoint how many carbohydrates you can eat and still be in a state of ketosis. And so when you're measuring your ketones with a Precision Extra device, that's the most reliable device on the market right now. There's a lot of breath meters coming out right now. There's urine sticks. The urine sticks are relatively inaccurate as far as being precise. So to really be precise, I think it's worth it to spend a little bit of money on Precision Extra device and then some ketone strips. The device is, I think, maybe $40 or $50 on Amazon. For that device, and then the sticks are a couple of dollars a shot, but I think it's definitely worth it to get an accurate reading, because otherwise you're just kind of you don't really know if you're getting into that state, if your body is producing ketones. So I think that's a huge reason to purchase that, and I'm glad I did. Um, and so so that's kind of the process of measuring those. And when you're measuring your ketones with that kind of a device, you want to be looking for something above zero point 0.5 millimolar. So that's about zero point 0.5 to 1. Sources kind of vary, but that's a state of mild ketosis. And then so anything above 1 to about typical ranges are going to be anywhere from about 1 zero point 0.5 to about maybe 5, and 5 is pretty deep ketosis, even upwards of 6 to 7. That would probably be achieved only by a several day, like maybe even like a week fast, probably, to get to that level. um, so that's but the target area should be anywhere above about zero point 0.5, anywhere to mid threes. If you're doing a ketogenic style diet, now those numbers, like I just said, are going to increase most likely if you do an extended fast, and those numbers I would think would increase if you were fat adapted beforehand. So it might take you a little bit longer if you're fasting. If you have been used to consuming carbohydrates, since your body kind of, it's got some rust on the wheels, and you gotta use a completely new system. And so that's a little bit inefficient at first, and you might get some brain fog, and you might be feeling a little bit crappy for the first couple of days. Doing a fast, especially when you're carbohydrate adapted. So I don't think I would personally recommend fasting if you're carbohydrate dependent. Excuse me. So it's much easier to transition into burning burning fats as fuel by way of limiting your carbohydrate intake to about 50 grams or less a day of total carbohydrate. So that's kind of the way I would probably do it. Do that for a number of weeks and even a number of months before you would go for an extended fast. And I'm not a doctor too, so ask for proper advice before you would do something like that. But that's kind of what I think personally, in my opinion, would be the best case scenario, is to slowly reduce your carbohydrate intake so that you become fat adapted as a gradual process, and then so it's not such a shock to your body. And then I think you'll have some better luck in that scenario. So why do I measure ketones? So like I just said, measurement is huge. I think Peter Drucker had a famous quote about measurement. We can change what we measure, and that's why I'm such an advocate of doing complete blood work. A complete blood panel, is that you can feel good, but at the same time you might have some underlying mechanisms at play that are promoting disease processes that you may not be aware of at all. But they may be slowly undermining your health, and they may show up 20, 30, 40 years from now. So that's why I'm such an advocate of that. But why do I measure the ketones is really because I want to get an accurate reading of how exactly I'm doing. So it's one thing to say, oh, I'm on a ketogenic diet, I'm eating low carb or whatever, but actually, how low are you going, and is that indicated in the blood testing? And so, because everybody's different, like I was saying before, everybody has a different carbohydrate tolerance. So you may be way better at synthesizing or producing ketones than somebody else. And so, to get an accurate understanding of that, I think you really have to spend the money and invest in a unit like this, and then to test that. Otherwise, you're kind of just making an educated guess, which is better than nothing for sure. But I think that's why I I would advocate for getting the unit and then actually testing it, because otherwise you can think you're getting into ketosis, but actually eating too many carbohydrates for your body. And so then you won't be reaping the benefits of the ketosis. So kind of all it takes is, maybe a couple weeks or, a couple months of monitoring that with a blood monitor, a ketone blood monitor. And then you'll be able to know, what meals cause what reactions, and, how many carbohydrates you can tolerate, and, what effects different things have. Because, ultimately, everybody is very unique. And, I'd love to just say, do this or do that, and you're going to be golden. But that's just not realistic, So, and that's, it's really empowering too, to be able to see those results and to see, oh, I'm eating a certain way, I'm eating like a salad, eating plenty of fat, eating moderate protein, and then here's the results that are actually showing up in my monitor. So that's just another, nice reinforcement that you're accomplishing your goal. So what you set out to do, if you are setting out to be in ketosis, it helps to actually prove that. And so let's see here, what else? So the benefits of ketosis. So there's a ton of benefits from ketosis. Anything from preventing neurodegeneration to preventing cancer or purging cancerous cells. There's research with autism, epilepsy, especially epilepsy. And I think it's just a good diet to experiment with. It's not for everybody, but there's tons and tons of benefits. Not being able or not having to eat. Dom D'Agostino, who's a great resource, he basically only eats breakfast, and then he eats dinner, and that's it. And he advocates that. He's talking about just thinking about all the time that you spend preparing meals, eating meals, planning for meals, cleaning up after the meals. So there's so much time that goes into that if you're free from that, because when you're in a state of ketosis, one of the main benefits of that is that you're not going to feel hangry, so you're not going to have those huge swings in blood sugar like you would on a conventional, like a typical standard American diet or a higher carbohydrate diet. You're not going to have to eat every 2 hours. So that's one of the main benefits from that perspective, is just time, productivity. If you are very busy, you're, a business person or in your job, you don't have time, you're a student, there's a lot of just meal prep, and there's just a lot of time involved in, eating 6 times a day or 4 times a day or whatever, so this is a nice diet that allows you the freedom, of traveling, of going and working all day, not having to think about that. That's another thing. We have a finite resource of willpower, and every decision that we make throughout the day, tends to deplete that, and they've shown that in studies. So the less decisions that you have to make, the less willpower reserve that you're using. So if you're using all this mental energy on prepping and planning and, preparing your meals all the time and having to worry about that, you're utilizing a lot of cognitive energy where that could be, if you're following a ketogenic style of a diet, that can be used in other adventures, your passions and your job or your work. And so, that's another benefit of it. The other problem with just a conventional diet is the swings in blood sugar. I mean, it's crazy. I used to deal with a lot of that. A lot of brain fog, a lot of irritability with. If I were to miss a meal, I would feel very hypoglycemic, wouldn't be able to function very well, mentally wasn't really completely there. And then, with a ketogenic diet, your body can shift right over into burning your own body fat as fuel. And so, your blood sugar will become very stable. I've measured mine, quite frequently, and it's ranged, usually, from the mid 70s, 80s, and then low 90s, even immediately after meals, because there's such a low glycemic index, lots of fibers, moderate protein and higher fat content in there. My blood sugar doesn't really go over, 94, 95, pretty much ever. And so, that's just a kind of a nice thing that happens is that you have that stable energy source. And so you're able to transition right, into burning fat as fuel. If you introduce a little bit of blood sugar into your system, you'll be able to burn that off, but you'll be able to shift right over seamlessly into burning fatty acids as fuel. Whereas when you're eating carbohydrates all the time and that's your primary fuel source, excuse me, you're not going to be able to transition efficiently into burning your own fat. And so you get a lot of symptoms from that. So if you miss a meal and you're primarily burning carbohydrates as fuel, you'll go into hypoglycemia, you'll get low blood sugar, you'll have mental fatigue, you'll get shaky, you'll get lightheaded, because your body doesn't want to burn its own fat stores because it's so used to burning sugar that it doesn't want to go there. So you have to train it to burn fats, and it's a process. It takes time. There's a little bit of pain or that can be involved with that in the form of brain fog or some maybe headache from coming off of sugar, and especially like coming off of gluten. That's another big one. When somebody would go to a ketogenic diet, I would advocate removing gluten as well. But that's kind of a whole another topic there. But so that's kind of a process, and but once you get into that, it's the benefits are there's a lot of benefits there. So let's see, the last thing I want to mention, this is getting a little bit long here, I didn't even realize. The use of exogenous ketones. So exogenous ketones, you've probably heard of, if you're in the health field at all, maybe you've never heard of any of this stuff, but you've stuck with it throughout this process here for the last 28 minutes or so. But exogenous ketones are, sources that your body utilizes that help it to get into ketosis or to burn ketones, or are just straight up ketones, And so, major sources of those, one of the most typical sources is coconut oil. This is a very mild source of exogenous ketones. There's a couple different chain lengths to the fatty acids that are in coconut oil. You have C10, C8, C10 and C12. And so those are the carbon lengths. That's the length of the fatty acid that's in coconut oil. So the C8 or the carbon 8 and the carbon 10 are what's processed as medium chain triglycerides or medium chain fatty acids, or MCTs. So there's a large percentage of coconut oil that's comprised of that. Now the lauric acid, or the C12 that's in coconut oil, is processed a little bit differently. Some people still think it's an MCT, although it's not really processed that way by the body. So the C8 and the C10 are metabolized very rapidly by your body and help it to produce ketones. So that's one thing that you can use. That's a great cooking oil anyways. It has a high smoke point, so the fat doesn't oxidize. Unlike a vegetable oil, those tend to oxidize very quickly with heat. So that's another side benefit of coconut oil. Um, the other ones are the MCTs. So some companies like Bulletproof is a great company. There's other companies out there that produce MCT oil. And so they're basically cleaving off the C8 and the C10 fatty acids from something like coconut oil. And so that will be, if you don't like the taste of coconuts, MCT oil is tasteless, so you can use that, you can put a tablespoon or so of that on your salad dressing. You can even blend that up in your coffee. I have another video on that, how to make bulletproof coffee. You can use that in smoothies. I do that a lot. And so with MCTs, there's a bowel tolerance. So if you have too much MCTs, you'll get disaster pants. So it'll go right through you. So you want to, if you're not used to consuming fats in general, you want to be consuming those gradually. Titrate those up gradually. And so I would probably start off with no more than about a couple teaspoons of MCT in a meal setting. So you could do that a couple times throughout the day. And so those will help you to start burning fats and fatty acids as fuel, and they'll help you to up your ketone levels and your blood levels. So that would be MCT oil. So there's another further derivative of MCTs, which would be a caprylic acid, or the C8. And so there's a product by Bulletproof again, brain octane oil. And so that's the shortest MCT out there. And so that one gets metabolized very rapidly and has the most profound effect on ketone levels in the form of MCTs. So in that family, the brain octane oil or the C8 caprylic acid would be the best bet for spiking your ketones. So that's again, the coconut oil is kind of the most mild version. The MCT will be the next higher octane, if you will, and then the brain octane would be kind of the highest octane. And so that one is going to be most expensive because they have to utilize a lot of coconuts to get that oil out of there. So that's going to be a little bit more pricey. The coconut oil is very cheap. You can get organic coconut oil pretty much anywhere, at the grocery store, or Sam's Club, or wherever. And then the MCT oil, you might be able to find that probably not at grocery stores, but it would have to be at a natural food store, or you can find it online, bulletproof.com or amazon.com, and you can search for MCT oils out there. I just know that Bulletproof makes a good product, so I just go with that one. So those are kind of the MCTs, the exogenous ketones. Then you have powders. So you have MCT oil powder. So those have been, according to some researchers, especially Dom D'Agostino, who's kind of a front runner in this field of ketogenic diets and ketosis. He, among others, they believe that has higher absorption with lower GI distress. So you can tolerate more of the MCT oil powder than you can of the MCT oil itself. I've used some of that as well. Quest Nutrition makes a good one for the MCT oil powder. And then there's also a C8 MCT oil powder as well. And so that's, again, the same kind of scenario. It's just a little bit higher potency than the MCT. So that's kind of that whole realm. And then you have beta hydroxybutyrate, which is like the next level. So that would be an even more powerful form of exogenous ketone. And those are pretty pricey. For a small jar of that, it's $50, $60, $70 for a jar of that. With not that many servings. They range from maybe about 15 to 30 servings ish in that price point. And so, if you want to dive deep, you can use that, and you can spike your ketones quite a bit. But and so if you can palate the unflavored versions, I've done that before. I've experimented with a lot of stuff, so my palate is kind of used to consuming, really gross things. But they have flavored ones out there as well that are flavored with stevia or natural sweeteners like that don't affect your blood sugar. So those are some to get to look into. Keto Canna is a good product. There's some other ones that are a little bit more cost effective. I think NutriCost puts one out. So there's definitely some products out there for beta hydroxybutyrate, but that's just an even more potent version of an exogenous ketone. So why might you want to consume an exogenous ketone? There's multiple rationale. Some people want to basically have their cake and eat it too. Literally, they want to have their carbohydrates and then just take the exogenous ketones and call it good. Personally, I don't think I would advocate for that. I think they've shown some benefits from that, but I just personally wouldn't really endorse that. I would say, the exogenous ketones work best in conjunction with a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet or a modified ketogenic diet. So it just helps you, and especially in the process, if you're going, if you're someone that's used to burning carbohydrates as fuel, the exogenous ketones can be of great benefit to you in that transitionary period. Because otherwise you can get stuff, like the keto flu, things like I was talking about before, just the typical, brain fog, lethargy, kind of low energy, for a couple days up to maybe a week or so of that, and that's pretty typical. But, when you introduce some exogenous ketones in that transitionary period, you can see some relief of those symptoms. So you'll be spiking your own ketone levels as you reduce your carbohydrate intake, and you'll be able to produce them on your own. So the better at burning fat you are, or the better fat adapted you are, the less dependent you'll be on exogenous ketones. So I use those. I tend to use them pretty regularly. With the brain octane oil, blending that up, making something like a bulletproof coffee, or using some of that in a tea, just like a green tea or a yerba mate tea, sort of like the type of stuff Tim Ferriss would advocate. So there's multiple applications for that, or even just like on a salad dressing, or to use on top of, after you're done cooking a meal, or even on sushi, stuff like that. Sashimi, that actually has a great, using brain octane oil or MCT oil with sushi is actually quite nice. Gives the sushi a very, it brings out the natural flavor of that, which is kind of interesting. So that's kind of how I do it, but you're going to be less dependent on that, on exogenous ketones when you're in a state of, keto adaptation. So that's kind of the overview of it. There's some other things that are coming out, like ketone esters right now, which are even a higher, potency. There's a lot of, military application for that. Cognitive enhancement, or even, preventing oxygen toxicity in underwater diving. Excuse me. So there might be some application for that, especially like for free divers, even people climbing, Everest or other high mountains where there's, even oxygen deprivation. There's shown to be a neuroprotective benefit of the exogenous ketones, or the body utilizing ketones in the state where the brain is, deprived of oxygen and nutrients. So that's kind of a whole nother frontier that, those have just been, they're not really out to the public for consumption yet. And also they taste horrible, apparently. So, So they're still working in formulation for those products to get those on the market, but those can have some clinical application, for some chronic disease processes and even just some anti-aging or longevity purposes. So just be on the lookout for those, but for now they're not quite ready. But that being said, you can definitely get into a state of ketosis from eating, just from diet alone. You can do it, and then from periodic fasting. I hope that helped. I'll be putting out some other information, some other videos on this. Just check the Facebook or my website, dansullivanhealthcoach.com for some more information. And then, post any questions below. I'll be looking through that and I'll answer those. Either I'll type the answer, or if it's a repeated kind of a question, I'll just make another video too. So, alrighty, hope that helped.